Ko maunga kōhatu te maunga, ko maunga kāhia te awa, ko te aroha te marae, ko Ngāti Tino te hapu, ko ngā puhi nui tōne te iwi, tēnā rā koutou katoa. My name is Papatuanuku Nahi. I'm a grassroots community action health worker. So I'm hoping that today we can bring some high-level UN decision-making people together with grassroots community action people, and together we can get the magic. So I just wanted to mention what Claire and Karen have talked about. Usually when we're thinking about having a voice on, or giving Māori a voice on issues, we do often think about te Treaty of Waitangi, and rightly so. But sometimes what happens in Aotearoa is that we have this thing, and Moana Maniapoto puts it nicely, where we're globally hot but locally not. And so sometimes if we're going to draw on our international mechanisms, we get more traction in the media and more traction with politicians often as well. And one of the ways that people have been doing that is by drawing on the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People, and that's gaining more sort of traction, and there's more awareness of this now, thanks to the work that Claire Charters and the Human Rights Commission have been doing. And I just want to acknowledge some of the rangatahi that have come down from Whāngarei and Whatuwhiwhi to be with us today. They were part of the youth workshop earlier in about October, I think. And so they were involved in understanding and learning more about the declaration and making videos about that as well. So kia ora kia koutou katoa. There are actually, as Claire has mentioned, a range of mechanisms and forums for us to have a say. It's not, we don't need to keep it to just a couple of these, although those are very important. We've got the Permanent Forum of Indigenous Issues. There's also the Convention on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. It's a really important forums for us to be at, but there's a wider range as well. And so hopefully from us all getting involved, we can strengthen our voice across all of these mechanisms. I also just want to shout out to Kingi Snelga in the back there, who has done lots of work in this area. So Kingi, if you've got anything to say, just put your hand up and share your learnings with us as well. So I wanted to look at some of the ways that we can have a say, and that can be by being observers at some of these big meetings or the smaller meetings as well. It can also come from presenting at some of these forums, or submitting a written report to the various mechanisms. And it can also come from having a voice in social media. And so these are some examples of what happened after the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child Committee meeting that was held in Geneva in September. So we had a small delegation that went, and as soon as it was on, we were tweeting about this issue. And so we had representation from some human rights lawyers, we had the Children's Commissioner tweeting, we had international child rights networks tweeting about it, UNICEF and myself as well, but not many people got the Te Reo Māori ones, but that's okay. And then we can have a voice in news media as well, and so following the General Assembly on the World Drug Problem, when we came back from that, we had a voice on Media Take and on Te Kaya and a range of media outlets. And then following the Convention on the Rights of the Child meeting, there was quite a lot of media interest in that. And Claire mentioned that, one of the key influencing factors from working with the United Nations is having a voice in the media and getting some media coverage about these issues and the concluding observations. And I just wanted to mention again, linking in with the international networks for human rights and child rights, and that was really beneficial, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. And really one of my main points is do all of the above, do all of that, be a presenter, write your reports, get on social media, get media coverage, link in with international delegations, link in with the NGO delegation, do it all. And again, Claire mentioned, why should we do this? It's a complex system, it's really complex, but hopefully with people like Claire and Karen on board, we've got people who can help us understand more about these structures. But the other reason that we should get involved is because we've always been involved in standing up and having a voice for the concerns of our communities and our whānau. And Whanakupa and Te Pueherangi are fine examples of that. When we stand up, when we have a voice, we can move mountains. Mahia te mahi hei paenga mo te iwi. And so I mentioned that in April of this year I was invited by the Drug Foundation to support the New Zealand delegation to another acronym here, UNGAS, which is the United Nations General Assembly Special Session on the World Drug Problem. They like long words. And that's another issue, is how do we make this language more accessible to our communities? And maybe that's something that we can talk about more today. So in April I popped along to that. That was a huge meeting. It was the heads of state coming together to set out the global drug policy basically for the next 10 to 20 years. Previously, when they met 20 or 19 to 20 years ago, a punitive approach was taken to dealing with drugs in the world, and that coincided with an increase in overdoses, with an increase in rates of HIV and hepatitis, and an increase in the rates of incarceration, particularly for Indigenous people. And that's why it's important that we have a voice at these forums. Despite it being the heads of state, 99% of the speakers, hundreds of speakers, were all heads of state. There were 5 speaking spots for NGOs or civil society, and Tuari Pōtiki, who was part of our delegation, managed to nab one of those spots. He's either a good talker, or as Claire mentioned, he was able to put forward why it's important for Indigenous people to have a say. He was one of the only people to get a standing ovation for that whole week. He put forward a powerful perspective on Indigenous voices on these issues. He talked about having been through those issues himself. He talked about why Indigenous people need to be at the forefront of solutions and why health approaches are important, not just punitive approaches. So despite being at these huge forums, there are opportunities for us to have a voice. And then in September I was part of the New Zealand NGO delegation that spoke or participated as observers in the Convention on the Rights of the Child, or the committee review of New Zealand's situation. So this was one of the reporting periods where New Zealand had to report back to say what they're doing on the Convention on the Rights of the Child. And that's an important mechanism that where child rights are enshrined in international law. So New Zealand does have to front up basically and say what they're doing. As many of you may know, there was a bit of, there was a lot of, the committee were very critical about the government's approach to child rights. They were critical, as you may have seen in some of the earlier tweets, that some things were piecemeal, that there was a piecemeal approach, that there wasn't a strategic whole of system approach to addressing rights. And these types of bodies are the places that can have a say, as I said, globally hot, locally not. If we say it here, we may not get as much traction, but when the United Nations Committee on the Rights of the Child says something, then people listen. So from my experiences with those 2 trips, and I'm just a newbie at this, I'm a health worker, I'm not a lawyer, but I'm a passionate person who wants action for our communities. And so that's why it's important for such a diverse team of people to get involved, because you come at it from such different angles. And so we had, on our delegation, we had lawyers, human rights lawyers, then we had community people, then we had people who knew about business. And so it's important to get all of these people coming together. But from my learnings, what I found is that if you are going to participate, get in with some people who are really passionate about these issues and know what they're talking about. Get people who are organised and can have a coordinator. Submit your reports and do that on time. Have a diverse range of skills, as I mentioned. Pre-prepare your media releases if you're able to, or get someone young because they can tweet really quickly, or Facebook or Instagram or Snapchat. Meet beforehand, meet during your trip, and debrief afterwards while you're there, if you are able to go along, and then reflect on it when you're back in Aotearoa as well. Link in with the international networks. There are forums or organisations that have been doing this for a long time. They know the most effective way to get their voices heard by committees. They know how to write up recommendations from the NGO delegation to put forward. And some take-home advice. I don't know how that's different from learnings, but there we go. So like I said, make links with the NGO delegation as early as possible. When I went on the Convention on the Rights of the Child delegation, it was just by luck, in fact, that I managed to link in with the wider delegation. And sometimes that's how it goes. But try, just make connections today with like-minded kindred spirits, and together, hopefully we can be more organised. Identify a coordinator of your group. That's really important. That can keep things going, that can keep people consistent with the key messages of your group. That can organise the activities, the side meetings with the New Zealand Task Force, side meetings with other Indigenous fellows that may be based in New York or Geneva, or the other Indigenous groups that are going there. Like I said, prepare your written reports in time for the close-off periods. Often those are quite a few months in advance of the actual meeting. Get to know your documents well, the declaration, Treaty of Waitangi, other conventions that are relevant to your meeting. And that's basically all. And then I just wanted to say, if you want to know more and get involved, there is a list going around the room, so sign your name up. There's also on the Facebook, there's the Māori and International Indigenous Processes page, which is really important, and most of the main, I think Claire runs that, has something to do with it. Yeah. And so some of the key documents are on there. For example, when the expert mechanism document was strengthened, that was put on there. Other things, they're on there. There's also on Twitter, at UN for Indigenous. That's the United Nations page on Indigenous issues. Check that out. Or you can check out Human Rights Commission and our associates on Facebook. And if you wanted to find out a little bit more about some of the things that happened at the Convention on the Rights of the Child meeting, we used a hashtag, and that was quite effective. So if you go onto Twitter and you look up hashtag UNCRC73, you'll see some of the tweets that we put out, and especially around the concluding observations that the committee made for New Zealand. If you wanted to find out about Tuari Pōteki's presentation at the UNGAS meeting in April, I encourage you to check out on YouTube. If you just put in Tuari Pōteki UNGAS, it'll come up with his video or his presentation, and it was really powerful. Or you can just email me, and I can send you some articles where we talked more in depth about the work that we did, even from entering the building at United Nations and getting stuck in the lift and not knowing what floor you went to or meant to go to. We didn't know what passes we were meant to get, how often we had to go back and get passes, just things like that. But then also, bigger than that is how to be more effective. And I think someone mentioned this morning, the reason this is important is because these forums, there are people there who are the authority on these issues, and so if we can meet and engage and interact with those people, it's more likely that we can influence decision making on Indigenous rights and Māori rights as well. Next. Yeah, so that's me, and just going back to the words of Te Puea, mahi a te mahi hei paenga mo te iwi. Kia ora koutou.